one of the great industries is trying to find scientific proof after scientific proof to give authority for this book. Why don't you read Surah 31, Ayah 10?
He created the heavens without pillars, that you see, and has cast into the earth firmly set mountains.
Mountains, okay.
Lest it should shift with you, and disperse therein from every creature.
Okay, let me just ask people here. Do you believe, does anybody here believe, that God put mountains on the earth to keep the earth from shaking? No. Like the Quran said. You learned that in school, didn't you? You have tectonic plates which are below the Earth's surface. Huge tectonic plates that are colliding. And as they collide, they push up the Earth. And that starts the mountains.
12. A 12-year-old knew that.
So the 12-year-old knows better than what the Quran knows.
Wow.
You are actually smarter than the Quran.
How did the Quran get it so wrong?
Well, I would suggest that whoever wrote the Quran, they didn't know about tectonic plates. Are showing that this is rubbish. You're right. You're correct. It looks like it's the Quran that's the problem. Prove me where I'm wrong then. Where am I wrong?
How many people? How many times did you lie?
Have I lied today? You tell us, why were the mountains put on earth? And how
was the Quran right or wrong?
Tell these people right now. Looks like they have borrowed, both of them have borrowed from unscientific men long before science has now disproved it, proving that science confronts the Quran. We're coming now to how do Muslims find authority for the Quran? We've found so many problems with the Quran. What is left for Muslims to give authority to this book?
Well, I've had several Muslims tell me about the scientific miracles of the Quran.
Okay.
The fact that in the Quran there's certain things that no one could have known at that time. So it must have been from Allah.
So there's no history there. There's a lot of contradictions there. There's theological problems there. There's difficulties with Muhammad there. So what do they have to prove that this is God's holy word? They've got to find another proof.
Yeah.
And the proof they're looking for is science. That's one of the big industries, is it not, in the Muslim world today?
One of
the great industries is trying to find scientific proof after scientific proof to give authority for this book.
Yeah.
And we've looked at some of those scientific proofs, right?
We have.
We're going to look at them today. We're going to unpack some of these scientific proofs, what they claim are proofs. And let's start with Surah 31, Ayah 10.
Okay.
And Surah 16, Ayah 15. And Surah 78, Ayah 6 to 7. And Surah 88, Ayah 19. Those are 4 references that talk about mountains. Now, what is it about mountains that the Quran says?
Well, I can start with Surah 16, Ayah 15. It says,
go ahead.
And he has cast into the earth firmly set mountains, lest it shift with you.
What does that tell you?
Well, it seems that the Quran is saying that Allah has put mountains on this earth, firmly set, just in case the earth starts to shift.
Okay, so the mountains are placed on the earth to keep the earth from shaking.
Yeah, to stop it from shifting.
So these are like tent pegs.
Tent peg stabilizers. I think they're called stakes in Surah 78.
Stakes, okay, they're called tent stakes. And we see that in Surah 31, Ayah 10, where they're referred to that, are they not? Why don't you read Surah 31, Ayah 10?
He created the heavens without pillars, that you see, and has cast into the earth firmly set mountains.
Mountains, okay.
Lest it should shift with you, and disperse therein from every creature.
Okay, let me just ask people here. Do you believe, does anybody here believe, that God put mountains on the earth to keep the earth from shaking? No. Like the Quran says?
No.
So you don't believe that, sir? Why not? But they're big, they're huge, they're heavy. You look at a mountain, it's pretty big, is it not? What about that specific area? Maybe they're there to keep the earth from shaking in that area. Would that not make sense?
Not scientifically. No.
But I would suggest that pre-scientific, pre-scientific man looking at mountains, and they're all over the earth, are there not? I was born on a mountain. I was born in the Himalayas in India. That's where I grew up. I spent my first 17 years on those mountains, and every year, Sarah, it used to shake.
Yeah.
We had earthquake after earthquake after earthquake. So if you were to ask me that the Himalayas were created by God to keep the earth from shaking,
It didn't work in the Himalayas, did it?
it didn't work in the Himalayas. In fact, I would suggest it's just the opposite.
Yeah.
Because what and how are mountains created? Does anybody know how mountains are created? Anybody want to guess?
Going back to geography. Yeah, go on.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And you learned that in school, didn't you? You have tectonic plates, which are below the Earth's surface. Huge tectonic plates that are colliding. And as they collide, they push up the Earth.
How
and
old
that
are
starts
you?
the mountains.
12. A 12-year-old knew that.
So the 12-year-old knows better than what the Quran knows.
Wow.
You are actually smarter than the Quran. And you know that because you have learned in school that there are tectonic plates. We learned that in school.
Yeah.
Even the 12-year-old knows this. And when a tectonic plate collides against another tectonic plate, it creates a wrinkle in the Earth's surface.
It does.
These are mountains.
Yeah.
In India,
mountain range.
where I grew up, you had the Indian plate clashing and smashing against the Tibetan plate, which created and is creating the Himalaya mountains. They're still growing today.
Yeah. Just a little bit at a time, you said.
About the length of a fingernail every year.
Yeah.
Not very fast. But because they're pushing against, it causes the earth to shake. And it's because mountains are being formed that the earth is shaking, completely opposite from what the Quran says.
How did the Quran get it so wrong?
Well, I would suggest that whoever wrote the Quran, they didn't know about tectonic plates. Now, when did we find out about tectonic plates?
I can't remember, Jay.
In the last century. In the 1900s. They would have not known about tectonic plates in the 7th century, the 8th century, and the 9th century when the Quran was put together.
Yeah.
So you can see why this is the conclusion they came to in Surah 16, in Surah 31, in Surah 78,
Yeah.
and Surah 88.
Yeah, if you're looking at it with your natural eye, they look quite formidable, don't they? They look like solid structures placed there. But no, we know now. We know better.
So the Quran is in error.
It is.
Our 12-year-old girl has gone now. I think she's satisfied. She knows better than the Quran. Now here, can you see? The Muslims are all leaving. They're not staying around.
That's fine.
You can see why, Sarah.
That's fine.
Let's continue on. Surah 23, ayah 13 to 14.
Surah 23.
We are showing that this is rubbish. You're right. You're
Yeah.
correct. It looks like it's the Quran that's the problem. Prove me where I'm wrong then. Where am I wrong?
How many people? How many times you lied?
Have I
Okay.
lied today?
So can you tell us? Can you tell us? Can you tell us where?
You said it yourself on YouTube. You've got agenda.
Everybody lies, yes. But have I lied just now?
What credibility are worse than?
Help us out then. Help us out then. How are the mountains formed?
You tell us, why were the mountains put on earth? And how did
Was
they
the
keep
Quran
the
right
earth
or
from
wrong?
shaking? Help tell these people right now.
What's the atomic number of things? Ask the archaeologists. What's the
No, the Quran makes a claim that it doesn't matter. The Quran makes a claim that the mountains are placed there as tent pegs. The mountains are placed there as stakes. You're saying that he's lying, but you're not coming up with anything better. Really and truly, the Quran is making claims. We're just assessing the claims.
Can you see they don't have an answer for this?
You don't have.
And neither does the Quran have an answer.
Bring an answer.
was a scholar? No. We are just normal human beings.
And yet a 12-year-old girl
A 12
knew more than what you know. She told us the answer. A 12-year-old girl. She was just here telling us.
You know everything.
I don't know everything. No, I don't.
What is clear
I
is
am
the
human
author
like
of
the
the
rest of
Quran
you.
didn't know how mountains were formed. That's the bottom line, Jay. That's the bottom
Calm
line.
down. Now we're going to go to the next one. They don't have an answer for the mountains as tent pegs, do they?
No.
So let's talk about the embryological cycle. Now, the embryological cycle is touted all over the Muslim world, is it not?
It is, yeah.
Why is it always brought up in debates, in discussions, in literature, on TV? They love the embryological cycle.
They're calming down now a little bit, but in some areas of the world, it's still a massive draw. It's still a massive scientific claim that some Muslims make.
And what's the claim behind it?
Well, the claim is that before there was understanding of how embryologies were formed, embryos were formed, that the Quran knew each of the steps correctly.
Because the embryo does form in different steps, does it not?
Different stages, yeah.
Different stages. Now, we know the Greeks knew about this, do they not?
Yeah, the Greeks
The Greeks talk about it. Hippocrates talks about it in the 4th century BC. I think he mentions 15 different stages.
Yeah.
Aristotle talks about it as well. He talks about a multiple of stages. He even lists the stages, does he not? What's interesting, who were the ones that actually translated Aristotle and Hippocrates?
It's the Arabs, the Muslims.
The Arabs, the Muslims. And when did they translate their text into Arabic?
When did they translate it?
Do you remember the date?
No.
The 9th and 10th century AD. That's why we even have Aristotle today. We would not have Hippocrates or Socrates or Plato or any of these Greek philosophers or any of the Greek scientists without the Muslims.
We wouldn't know about them at all.
But they also translated another man. We're going to get to him, because I would like to know what the Quran says in Surah 23, verse 13 and 14. Why don't you read it for the crowd here? This is what the Quran says.
Surah 23, verses, or ayah 13 to 14. Then we placed him as a sperm drop in a firm lodging.
Okay, that's the first stage. A sperm.
Sperm drop.
In a lodging means within the woman, okay?
Yep. Then we made the sperm drop into a clinging clot.
Nutfa, it's what the name is in Arabic. Nutfa, a clinging drop.
Yeah. And we made the clot into a lump.
Okay, that's alaka. Okay?
And we made...
So that's the same stage. So we're still in the second stage.
Yep. And we made the lump bones.
Bones. So there's the third stage.
And we covered the bones.
And then means there's another stage.
Yeah, one more stage.
One more stage. So you've got first you've got the zygote, which is the sperm that goes into the woman, which is made into a clot, which is the alaka. The nutfa becomes the alaka. And then you have the bones.
The lump and then the bones.
The lump and the bones, okay? So that's 3.
Yep. And then we covered the bones with flesh.
Then we covered the bones with flesh. So there's the 4th stage. Now, hold on a minute. That sounds pretty logical to me. What's wrong with that?
I think most biologists will notice that the bones are not covered with flesh.
So before we get to that, where do you think the Quran got this? Where do you think the writers of the Quran got these 4 stages? Because have we seen these 4 stages before?
We have seen it before. The Quran claims that it came from Allah, so divine knowledge from Allah.
Okay. So where have we in human history seen these 4 stages before?
A guy called Galen.
So Galen, he's not Greek.
No.
He's not a philosopher.
No.
He wasn't writing in the 4th century BC.
No.
So when was he writing, and who exactly is Galen?
Well, we know that Galen, is it modern day Bangladesh is where it's not Bangladesh.
No, today it would be in Ctesiphon, which is Baghdad.
Baghdad, sorry. In Baghdad. He was a Jew.
He was a Jew. And what was his work? What did he do as a Jew? He was an embryologist. This was his whole work, was it not? So he was an expert on the embryology, which means he had looked at the embryology inside a woman. He had looked at miscarriages. He knew exactly what these stages were. He thought, right?
Was he writing before Muhammad or after Muhammad?
He was writing in the 2nd century AD.
Okay.
So this is a good 500 years before Muhammad and a good 600 to 700 years before the Quran was written down.
So in that region, in the Middle East, this knowledge was already there.
It was known all over that area. They knew about this, well versed in this. Galen was well respected in almost every one of the major cities. He'd been around for 500 years. So it stands to reason that this would be in the Quran. Looks like they borrowed Galen's 4 stages.
It looks like they borrowed Galen.
They didn't borrow Hippocrates.
No,
they didn't borrow Aristotle.
No, they had many
They
more
went
stages.
to Galen.
Galen.
And Galen would be a pretty good person to borrow, but there's a problem with Galen, and you intimated it before. What's the problem with Galen? First of all, before we get to the problem, let's unpack those stages.
Yep.
Is it a miracle to know about those 4 stages?
No.
Why not?
Well,
The nutfa, which would be the semen,
Yeah.
is quite observable. If you're a man, you know what a semen is, right?
Yeah.
We know where it is. We know where it comes from.
Yeah.
It is quite observable.
It
Is this embarrassing you?
See,
You don't need to be embarrassed. When you get married, you know what I'm talking about. Now, once you have the semen going into the woman,
he's saying that you're lying. He doesn't know about the birds and the bees.
we're talking about your Quran. No, he's calling my Quran. His Quran is a liar. We haven't even got off the Quran, and he's calling us a liar already.
Okay, so we've got the sperm.
Okay, here we go. So you have the sperm,
Yep.
the semen, going into the woman.
Yep.
It creates a lump called the alaka.
Yep, the clots into
Where
a
could you observe that lump?
Well, I mean, if there's an abortion, you can pretty much see.
Or a
Or a
miscarriage?
miscarriage, you can see.
Anytime there's a miscarriage, there would be a lump, would it not?
You see the remains, which
You
is.
see the remains. And it looks like a clot of blood, does it not?
Yeah.
A clot of blood.
Yeah.
So that's observable. The semen is observable. What's the only 2 areas that are not observable?
How the bones and flesh are formed. Yeah.
This would not be observable because this would be inside the woman, unless you could go in and watch it being formed inside the woman, which Galen would not have been able to do.
Not in the 2nd century.
Not in the 2nd century, nor in the 7th century,
No.
not until we had microscopes and telescopy that could go into a woman's womb, which is
right.
very recently. But what do we now know about the embryo? Does the bones form before the flesh?
We now know that's not the case.
That is not the case.
Yeah.
The bones do not form before the flesh. So Galen got that wrong,
He got it wrong, yeah.
and that makes sense why he got it wrong.
He couldn't see. He was going by what he could observe.
He could not observe that.
Yeah.
That's the one area, the 2 areas he could not observe. So how are the bone and the flesh, how do they form?
They grow together. They form together.
Simultaneously. We now know that today. So not only was Galen in error, looks like the Quran's in error as well.
But was Galen claiming the authority of God
No,
when he was making
Galen
this?
never claimed the authority of God. Yet the Quran is claiming the authority of God. Would God have made a mistake like that?
No.
Not my God.
No. Impossible.
Impossible. You know that's impossible. So we've now got 2 problems.
Yeah.
We've got a problem with the mountains. We've got a problem with genealogical cycle.
Yeah.
Both of them are in error. Looks like they have borrowed, both of them have borrowed from unscientific men long before science has now disproved it, proving that science confronts the Quran. Let's move on. While we're on the whole thing with semen, what does the Quran say in Surah 85?
86.
Ayah 5 to 7.
When it talks about the fact of where the semen comes from, its
So
origin,
where does the semen come from according to the Quran?
it emerges between the backbone and the ribs.
It emerges from between the backbone,
Backbone.
so up here somewhere.
And the ribs.
My
So-
ribs are up here.
Yeah.
So it has to be up here. Hold on a minute. I'm a guy, you're a woman. Is that where semen originates?
That I'm aware of, no.
Go ahead, sir. Why don't you read it?
So Surah 86, ayah. It says, so let a man observe from what he was created. He was created from a fluid, ejected, emerging between the backbone and the ribs.
From a fluid ejected, emerging between the backbone and the rib. Now we know you're a man, I'm a man, I know it's embarrassing, but we know that when we eject that fluid, the semen, it is not from up here, it's from somewhere else.
You acknowledge that?
I'm not going to say it on the camera here,
Yeah.
it's not important. You know that this is completely wrong.
Are you,
Can you see why we're bringing these up?
are you a Muslim? You're not a Muslim.
So here's another problem with semen.
Yeah.
Okay, not seamen that are on the boats.
Not on the ships, no.
But they would have this problem as well if that were the case. Now let's go to cow's milk.
Oh, dear.
Cow's milk, Surah 16, Ayah 66. Surah 16, Ayah 66 intimates, I'm not going to say this is a proof, but it seems to intimate where cow's milk comes from. You want me to do it here?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Now, while you're looking it up here, let me go ahead and say what we're doing. So, I have observed cows, and I'm sure you have observed cows too, right? Do you know where the milk comes from in a cow?
All right.
From the udder in English. I don't know what the name would be in Arabic. But the udders are below the cow, right? Towards the back part of the cow, but below the cow. Do you know where the excrement from a cow comes from? I know this is embarrassing. The excrement is quite a bit above it, is it not? In the hind end, right? Now let's see what the Quran says the milk comes from.
In Surah 16, Ayah 66. And indeed for you in grazing livestock is a lesson. We give you drink from what is in their bellies, between the excretion and the blood, pure milk, palatable to drinkers.
So between the blood and the excretion is where the milk comes from.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that, sir? I don't want to drink milk after this. Because suddenly now milk is not so wholesome according to the Quran. Thank God we don't follow the Quran when it comes to where our milk comes from. Let's move on. Pork. We eat pork all the time. I love ham. Do you like ham?
Yes. I do like ham, yeah.
Oh, I love ham.
I like bacon.
I wish you could eat ham.
Book of Leviticus, chapter 11, verses 7 to 8. The pig has a split hoof. Do not eat from it. It's unclean to you.
For the Jews, yes, but not for me, because I have Jesus Christ. And what does Jesus say? Can we eat the unclean animal?
Yeah.
What is that beautiful story about Cornelius?
The beautiful story is that at one time they were thinking, is this gospel, is this good news, is the Messiah only for the Jewish people?
That's right.
Only for the Jewish people, because God was very careful in the Old Testament to protect the Jewish line, because there was a number of promises talking about who this Messiah is going to be, and he was going to come from the Jewish line. So there was the question, well, now that Messiah has come, do we just share it with the Jews, or do we share it with the Gentiles, the rest of the people? God gave Cornelius a dream, didn't he?
And what was in the dream?
It was a sheet.
It was a sheet.
Coming down.
And what was in the sheet?
Unclean animals.
Unclean animals. The very animals that the Jews were not permitted to eat.
Yeah.
In the vision of Cornelius, now God was saying, now you can eat
Now
them.
you can eat. Now the message is for everyone. The same reason why before they went into the temple there was a curtain. When Jesus died, what happened?
The curtain's been rendered. So now we can go directly to God.
Amen.
We don't have to go to the temple to meet God.
All
the
symbolic.
temple is right here today, is
All
it not?
symbolic, telling us of what the mission of Jesus was.
That's what the mission.
Why he was called Messiah. Why
we don't need the priests. We have become the priests, have we not? We don't need the temple. The temple is where there are two or three.
And Jesus is our great high priest.
He is our great high priest. And we don't need to sacrifice anymore.
No.
We don't need to be careful what we eat.
No.
That we can now,
well, apart from nutritional value.
except no more blood that comes, no more milk that comes from excrement and blood.
We don't want that.
So we don't drink that anymore. Yes, I know what milk is. Milk comes from the cow. It comes from the udder of the cow. It's what?
There is a verse talking about pure milk, but it's talking about basic things.
Did you hear him?
I don't know, there's a scripture talking about don't just rely on pure meat, but get to the meat of the gospel. So there's a basic understanding, but then there's some deeper things. This guy, bless him, only knows about the basic understanding of the law, but he misses the complete deeper understanding of why Jesus came, the whole idea of salvation, the whole idea of redemption.
And he came not to destroy the law. He says that very clearly in Matthew 5. I have not come to destroy it, but to fulfill it.
Fulfill it.
And one of the fulfillments is now we can eat ham.
Because he did everything
bacon.
that was required of the law.
I'm so glad
it
Jesus
no longer
came.
Applies.
I love ham.
Yeah.
If only this young lad here could eat ham. Can you know, if he became a disciple of Jesus Christ, he could eat ham. Yes, sir.
He said that they could eat ham. The full quote of Jesus was, that till heaven and earth shall pass, one jot or one tittle of the law of the prophets shall pass in the law.
That's
So
right.
I say you shouldn't be eating ham.
Now,
What does
have you
that
read
mean?
Matthew 5?
I might.
He says, I have come to fulfill the law. So the law has now been fulfilled in him.
If you're a driver,
said the law and the prophets. There's lots of prophecies, including Jesus' own prophecies.
There you go. And what did Jesus' prophecy say about ham?
if you're a driver and you are speeding and you get 3 points.
Madam, I'm trying to speak to this man. He says till heaven and earth is are still there, and the last time I looked, earth is still there. Till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or a tittle of the law in no way passes from the law.
Jay, if you're a driver
Yeah, go ahead.
and you're speeding
Yeah.
and you get caught by the police,
That's correct.
and you get a fine,
That's correct.
and you get 3 points.
That's correct.
Yeah? Once you've paid the fine,
Once I paid the
and
fine.
and you've been a driver for the
That's
required
right.
period,
That's right.
the penalty is fulfilled.
It's fulfilled,
It
you're
doesn't
right.
mean it's off the statute book.
So the penalty was fulfilled by whom?
It was fulfilled
In my
by,
case, it would be fulfilled by me
you paid the fine.
because I paid the fine.
You allowed the points, the
But the
time
penalty
to lapse.
of sin
Yeah,
that Adam and Eve brought into the world
yeah.
had to be paid not by me or
No,
you,
by Jesus.
by God himself.
So when he's talking about does a dot or a tittle pass away, the law is still on the statute books. You still get fined for
Still get
speeding
the-
if
you
you're
still
doing
do.
it. But if you've been fined and the fine has been paid,
It's been paid.
satisfied.
Ooh, I love Jesus.
Then
Ooh, I love Jesus. So the
there's no
penalty has been paid.
There's no contradiction. It's just
And
a
that's
lack
a
of
beautiful hymn that we
understanding.
sing. The penalty's been paid.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to sing it right now. My voice is not good enough. Let's move on. So, in Surah 6, Ayah 38,
Yeah.
it says that every animal, every living thing lives in communities.
Yeah.
Is that true? Can you think of any animal or any living thing that does not live in communities?
I haven't seen two spiders living together.
Spiders. That's an idea. So spiders, that's right.
And-
Spiders do not live in communities.
Tigers.
In the American electorate, that's correct. Since Trump has now the president, we don't live in community in America. And since Brexit, Britain no longer lives in community. But we're being facetious now. What we are saying is, you cannot put all there. You
No.
cannot say every creature.
Every
Be careful,
creature.
that's a superlative where the Quran has got it wrong.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure whoever wrote the Quran did not know about spiders.
God wouldn't have got that wrong. God
But
created
God would not have
spiders.
made a claim like that,
No,
okay?
no.
Let's move on. According to Surah 65, Ayah 12, there are 7 heavens and 7 earth. Help me here, Sarah.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That's a very good question.
Which 7 heavens are there?
Which 7 heavens are there? Well, I mean,
Are these planets?
well, Tamidi describes them as domed structures.
Now, we talk about the 3 heavens that we have here. The heaven that's above us,
Yeah.
the heaven that's a stratosphere, and then the greater heavens, which should be the universe. So we have 3
Yeah.
that we talk about quite normally.
Yeah.
Is that what this is referring to?
Not Tamidi. Tamidi says this. He says, "Do you know what's under?"
Okay, you're saying Tirmidhi,
Yeah.
and explain who Tirmidhi is. He is one of the hadith writers.
One of the Hadith, one of the Sahih 6.
One of the Sahih. So
Yeah.
he is authoritative like Bukhari and Muslim. Go
He
ahead.
should be authoritative. He should be authoritative. He was talking about the earth. So he's actually talking about the heavens a little bit higher up. But he says, "Do you know what is under that?" He said, "Do you know what is under you?" Muhammad is asking. They said, "Allah and His Messenger know better."
Yeah.
And he said, "Indeed, it is the earth. Do you know what is under that?"
Yeah.
Allah and His Messenger know better. And he said, "Verily, below that is another earth. Between the two is the distance of 500 years.
500 years.
And below it is another earth.
Another earth.
Between the two, of which the distance is 500 years."
Another 500 years.
And he keeps going on until we get to,
The bottom one.
yeah.
Then who's in the bottom one?
Oh dear. Then this is quite sin. He said, this is Muhammad speaking,
Right.
"By the one in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad, if you were to send down with a rope to the lowest heaven, then he would descend upon Allah."
So Allah is in the lowest heaven.
That's what Tamidi is saying.
Wait a minute.
That's
So
what-
Allah is on earth, that means. The lowest heaven is right here.
The lowest earth, yeah. That's
But
what Tamidi is saying.
According to the to the Mi'raj, which happens in 621 AD, Muhammad was woken up in the middle of the night, sent on the back of the Burak, the winged horse, to Mecca, sorry, to Jerusalem.
To Jerusalem.
And from Jerusalem, he ascended the 7 heavens. So there's the 7 heavens again. And he met with Allah in the 7th heaven. That completely contradicts what Sinmidi is saying
Sinmidi
here.
said he should have gone down. He should have descended to
It's
the
just
lowest.
the opposite.
Yeah.
Now, it looks like there's a confusion here.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing. It's a bit
So
confusing.
should we go with the Quran or should we go with Tirmidhi?
And I should say it's volume 5, book 44, hadith 3298.
So, volume 5, book 44, hadith 3298.
Yeah.
That's fascinating because that means that Tirmidhi either got confused or that's a misprint.
A bit
But
of
God
confusion
would not
there.
get confused
No,
like
God
that. I'd
doesn't-
still like to know if there's any Muslim here that can help us where these 7 heavens are. And where are the 7 earths?
Where are they?
Where are they? Now, I do know that Dante's Inferno talks about 7 heavens and 7 earths. Could this be the source for this story?
What is Dante's Inferno?
Dante's Inferno is nothing more than a fiction. It is nothing more than a science fiction. It was an entertainment. It was an anthology, an entertainment of the 7 heavens and the 7 earth of man that all must ascend to.
Yes, it's very interesting.
Certainly not scripture, not from God, but from a man.
Sounds very similar.
Could be that that's where they got it from. Let's now go to the sun moves.
Can I answer about the 7 heavens and the 7 heavens?
Yes, go ahead.
There is first heaven, second heaven, third heaven. The prophets will go to the 7th heaven because they have no sins.
Where is Allah?
Allah sent them to the heaven.
Which heaven is Allah in?
Allah is everywhere, not in only heaven.
So Allah is not in heaven, you're saying?
Everywhere.
Is Allah right here?
Of course.
Oh, so Allah can come to earth.
We cannot see him.
I had no idea. So Allah can come to earth. So if Allah can come to earth, then can God come to earth?
Allah is God
And God can come to earth.
And God is Allah.
Okay.
Can God come to earth?
Everywhere.
So God can come to earth. But Muslims tell me that Jesus cannot be God because God cannot come to earth.
Confusing.
So she is now confronting that whole notion. Maybe that's her belief.
No.
But here we have in Tirmidhi, we've just read Tirmidhi, who is one of your Sahih Hadith writers, along with Bukhari, Muslim, Ibn Dawud, and Tirmidhi. He now is saying that Allah is in the lowest heaven. Allah resides in the lowest heaven. Yet in the Mi'raj, which you have learned since you were a little girl, Muhammad went to the 7 heavens in the Mi'raj, and he met with Allah in the 7th heaven. So Allah is in the 7th or in the 1st?
He didn't meet with him personally. Muhammad did not see
Oh,
Allah.
it does say, because he talked to Allah.
He didn't see Allah.
He did, he talked to Allah.
No, even if
Oh,
all the prophets.
so here's another contradiction.
Moses talked to Allah. Moses talked to Allah.
Oh, Moses can talk to Allah.
Moses did talk to Allah.
Can you talk to Allah?
I can't.
Where
But
did
Moses can.
Even if I talk to Allah.
So where
but
did
he
Moses
doesn't
talk to
answer
Allah?
me.
Where did Moses talk to Allah?
Yes, I know he did. Yes, I know. But I'm surprised a Muslim is saying
He
it.
talked to Allah on earth. So
In
right?
the burning
He heard
bush.
a voice.
In the burning bush.
He heard a voice.
Okay, we're getting off subject here. This is the burning bush in Surah 20, ayah 10 to 14. Now let's get back. We've done the 7 heavens. What about who and what creates shadows? I want you to open up Surah 25, ayah 45 and 46.
Yeah.
What does it say there?
Have you not considered your Lord, how he extends the shadow? And if he willed, he could have made it stationary.
Okay.
Then we made the sun for it as an indication, and we hold it in hand for a brief grasp.
Okay. So the sun was made. Continue on verse 26. Sorry, 46.
That's 46.
That is 46.
Yeah.
Okay, so the sun is supposed to move. You're missing one verse there.
Let me use your Halali Khan.
And she's got it.
Ah, okay.
Lizzie took it. Let's 46 then says, and it's the sun that moves to create the shadow, to extend the shadow.
I have a sanitized Quran.
What's that?
I have a sanitized Quran.
Okay, go ahead and see what it says. So here we have reference that the shadows do not move until the sun moves.
Yeah. Have you not considered your Lord, how he extends the shadows, and if he will, he could have made it stationary. Then we made the sun for it an indication, then we hold it in hand for a brief grasp. Let me try a different translation. What's the
Yeah, if there is no sun, there is no shadow. If there is no sun,
No, we know that the sun makes a shadow, but what creates the shadow to move? The sun? So the sun moves.
not the sun doesn't move.
According to the Quran, it's the sun that's moving.
No, we created the sun.
And what happens to the sun at nighttime?
The light is there, the light is there.
And is the sun moving? Look at Surah 18, verses 80 to 105. We don't need to go through the whole of them. In Surah 18, you have the story of Dual Qarnayn. You know Dual Qarnayn in your Quran.
Qarnayn.
Dual Qarnayn.
Dual Qarnayn.
Sorry for my accent. I'm not
I
gonna.
understood you.
No, but I'm not gonna make fun of your accent either in English.
No,
Yeah.
I understood.
So here we have Dual Qarnayn. He goes to the west and he sees the sun setting in the water. Then he runs to the east and he sees the sun coming up out of the water. The sun is moving up out of the water. And the people that are there are getting burned because of the heat of the sun. They're so close to the sun. Then he runs to the north and he sees a people who are being confronted by the barbarians on the other side of the mountains. So Dual Qarnayn builds a wall of iron and brass between the two mountains to keep the people from coming across the wall. This is in your Quran. Do you believe this happened?
Not all what you say.
But yet the Quran says it very clearly.
Yeah.
So the sun is setting in the water,
Yep, in a murky pool of water.
muddy pool of water.
You are paraphrasing as you want.
I can read it for you.
Okay, go ahead and read
Yeah.
it, but it's it'll take us all day.
Well, just the bit with the setting in the pool of water. Then they asked you, Muhammad, about Dual Qarnayn, and I will recite to you about him a report. Indeed, we established him upon the earth, and we gave to him everything in a way. So he followed a way until he reached the setting of the sun. He found it setting in a spring of dark mud, and he found it near a people. So a specific place. Allah said, "O Dual Qarnayn."
A spring of dark mud.
Yeah.
So
And-
it sets in a spring.
Yeah.
Do you believe the sun sets in a spring of dark mud?
That is, it's
Yeah. Ibn Abbas says where the sun sets, a blackened, muddy, and stinking spring.
Okay, we're reading the Quran, are we not?
We're reading the Quran.
So if you say we're lying, then the Quran is lying.
No, we're just reading the Quran.
Why was it that you never have a church when Christ was alive? It was only AD 325.
What, hold on.
Okay, let's continue. He wants to change the subject on the Bible because you can see he's getting a problem with the Quran. So here we go.
We'll talk to you.
We're going to the sun. It's setting in a spring of water.
Yeah.
This is not the ocean then.
It's not the ocean.
And it's a
no.
muddy piece of water, so it's a puddle.
Ibn Abbas said it was stinking.
It was stinking.
Yeah, a
so it looks like a puddle.
muddy, and
A
stinking
stagnant
spring.
puddle.
Yeah.
That's even worse than the ocean.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's really unscientific.
Yeah.
We've got a real problem there.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting. We're not going to move on because we're running out of time. We're running out of light here. Let's go to Solomon. I just want to just briefly mention Solomon. And you find it in Surah Surah 27, ayah 17 to 44.
Yeah.
Many verses. We can't read all the verses. The
Yeah.
sun is setting.
Sun is setting.
No spring here.
No
puddle.
muddy spring, no
we know that
stinking
the
spring.
sun is not setting. That's just a matter of speech.
Yeah.
The earth is turning and moving. But I can see how pre-scientific man would say the sun is moving.
Yeah.
And in Surah 16, it's very clear that, in Surah 25, it's very clear that the sun is moving. Now, when we get to Solomon, he speaks to birds.
He does.
So does Queen of Sheba speak to birds.
Yep.
Now, God can do that, right?
God can do anything.
Yeah, and I don't have any problem. We have in the Bible that man is listening to an ass, a donkey, because they make noises. It says also in chapter 27, verse 18 to 19,
Yeah.
that Solomon speaks to ants, and ants speak to him.
Yeah.
Now, here's a problem I have with that. Do ants speak?
Ants don't communicate with speech the way we do, and the way
So how do ants communicate?
chemicals, pheromones.
Pheromones. They use pheromones and they actually rub their legs together and they exchange chemical exchange. So it's a chemical exchange between the ants and the other ants.
It's interesting that Solomon is the one doing this, because what do we find out about Solomon in the Bible?
He's very wise.
He's the wisest man that ever lived at the time, and it seems that the Muslims or whoever wrote the Quran has gone in excess of what we see in previous
so they've
revelations.
embellished his wisdom.
It looks like an embellishment to the point where he's even speaking to ants.
So in everything we're coming to, it looks like these are man-made stories.
If they just went back to the people of the book as they're commanded to do, they would see where Solomon had wisdom, important wisdom for the nation.
In the biblical account of Solomon, does he talk to birds?
No.
Does he create an air force?
No.
Does he send them flying up over the enemy to drop stones on people with the name of the enemy on the bottom?
No.
None of this is in the biblical account.
No.
Does he talk to ants in the biblical account?
No.
Does the Queen of Sheba talk to ants?
No.
So in every case, you can see there's been an embellishment.
Yeah, and when we say the biblical account, we mean the Jewish Bible, which is our Old Testament. So we are completely agreed with the Jews. We share the same stories, we have the same books, and we don't find it in that at all.
And we don't have any scientific problems with what Solomon did. We're having some questions here, especially talking to ants.
Yeah.
I don't see how he could talk to ants. Yeah.
So where do you think these stories are coming from in the Quran?
It's a good question.
Are these coming from Gnostic Christians or Syriac writings? Where do you think?
Almost every one of them are coming from Jewish apocryphal accounts. All of these can be traced back. We did this 2 weeks ago. We looked at this. Sorry you weren't here at that time. You can go up on Pfander film. And we've looked and showed these mainly come from the Targum, the Mishnah. These are the Targum of Jonathan ben Uzziah, the Mishnah of Sanhedrin. This comes from also the second Targum of Esther. This particular story comes from the second Targum of Esther.
I remember it's a very oral culture, so they're telling these as stories as well, like bedtime stories. And
these are not written down necessarily. Many of these are oral traditions.
Yeah.
These are sent orally.
How do we know them? How can we verify that?
Oh, they're written down today. But when they were told back in those days, when they were created, many of them were created by the Jews for their children.
so the problem is, the Quran says that Allah has 4 revelations: Torah, Zabur, Injil, and the Qur'an. We know what's in the Torah. We know what's in the Injil. These stories are not there. They're not there. And if you're saying that you're saying that you're coming after him and you're affirming what's gone before, then we shouldn't have this here. And also, if Allah is telling Muhammad, if you're not sure about anything, go to the people of the book. He didn't do that because he would have found that these things are not here. Yeah.
Go ahead, talk.
Yeah. So that's one of the problems that we found with Pharaoh employing jinn as well, talking to ants. But there was another problem with creation.
Okay, tell me about creation. Surah 41 and Surah 6.
Well, it seems like
Surah 7, sorry.
Yeah, it seems like a complete contradiction. And we find in Surah 41 an 8-day creation.
So verse 9 starts with 2 days, right?
2 days to create the earth.
Verse 10 then says there's 4 days to populate the earth.
To set the mountains on it.
Mountains to keep them from shaking.
Yeah.
That's getting back to Surah 31 ayah 10.
Yeah.
So there verse 9 talks about 4 days. So now we have 6 days.
6 days.
2 days to create the earth. 4 days to create everything within the earth.
Yeah.
Then verse 12 talks about another 2 days to create the heavens.
The heavens.
So you have the earth created in 2 days. Everything in the earth another 4 days. And then another 2 days to create all the heavens. How many days is that?
8 days in total.
8 days. In Surah 7, verse 54, how many days is there?
6 days.
6 days.
Yeah.
So there's a contradiction between Surah 41 and Surah 7. Which is it?
I don't know. I'm waiting for whoever wrote the Quran
Thank
to tell
God
us.
I don't have to follow the Quran.
Right.
Not only is this not scientific, this is contradictory within itself.
That's right.
Whoever wrote the Quran borrowed these stories without checking out his sources.
Yeah.
Again, borrowing these stories. Now let's continue with the youth and the dog who sleep for 309 years in Surah 18, ayah 9 to 25. Again, way too long to read all this.
It's really long. Why don't you summarize?
Summarize really what it is. You have these 3 men who go into a cave, a dog slinks in behind them, and they're put to sleep for 300 years and then 9 more years. So 309 years. Now, according to the Quran, it says we're not sure of how many days. It could be 300. It could be how many? 3 men, maybe 6 men, maybe more. There is even a argument as to how many men were there.
Yeah.
But what is very clear in the last verse is they were there for 309 years.
That's right.
Where does that come from?
Sounds like an Ephesus story, doesn't it?
It comes from the city of Ephesus. This is a well-known account. There has been a tradition in Ephesus. The cave is still there today. I have seen it. I've been there with my sister. You can see the 7 sleepers. In Ephesus, it's 7, not 3. But the Quran even questions it could be 7.
They say it could be 3, could be more.
There you go. So it looks like there's another story borrowed from Ephesus, put into the Quran, which is now not even embellished. It's pretty much the same story, except there's including the dog.
Yeah, we're not sure where the dog came from.
Well, it slunk in somewhere in there. And now we get to the people who become apes. In Surah 2, ayah 65 to 66. In Surah 7, ayah 163 to 167. What do you do with that? These people are made into apes.
Always the pastor is here and the
I asked Muslims why would Allah turn people into apes?
And what specific people are turned into apes?
The Jewish people.
These are Jews who are turned into apes. It's obviously that the Quran does not like Jews. And you have this here in Surah 2, ayah 65 and 66, where you have reference after reference right through the Quran about Jews being less loved than Christians.
Yeah.
Do not take Jews and Christians as friends. Surah 5, ayah 51.
Very sad.
It's very sad. And here they're turned into apes. There seems to be an anger against Jews. Whether or not God can do that, I'm sure he could do that. But why would he turn Jews into apes?
No.
Surah 1 probably gives us the reason in verse 7.
Yeah.
And what does it say in the Fatiha, verse 7?
He says that the Jews are the ones, we know from the exegesis talking about the Jews who have caused Allah wrath.
They have caused God anger. And it's because they have caused God anger, because they refuse. Remember, it was the Jews that refused to accept Muhammad.
Yeah, and the Christians.
But mainly the Jews.
Yeah.
And it was the Jews that Muhammad fought against the Banu Kainuka family, Banu Nadir family, the Banu Quraiza family in 624, 625, and 627.
Yeah.
That comes from the the Sirah.
It's interesting, isn't
of
it?
Ibn Hisham.
When Muhammad was speaking to the Jews, he wasn't giving these scientific claims, and he wasn't saying that the Quran is a miracle. He was saying, look in your books, I'm there, I'm mentioned there. But they didn't find him, did they?
No, they didn't. No, they didn't.
Yeah.
We end now with Surah 12, ayah 93 to 96, where you have Jacob, the father of Joseph. Jacob is in Canaan, Joseph is in Egypt, hundreds of miles away, and yet Jacob can smell Joseph from that far a distance. Now, I'm not saying that God cannot do that, but where and do you think this story comes from?
I mean, it doesn't even say that God gave Jacob the power to do that.
No, it just said that Jacob could smell it. Now, he does get the cloak of Joseph, does he not? And he smells Joseph's hand. That's the biblical account, is it not?
Yeah, that's right.
So you've got a story about the biblical account of the cloak of Joseph, that Jacob could smell his son on the cloak.
Yeah.
They've confused that, saying that he could smell him hundreds of miles away.
They got it confused, didn't they? Because he got the coat from, well, it's Jacob, isn't it? It seems like they mixed it up with Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat.
The Technicolor Dreamcoat made famous.
And Jacob and Esau.
And Jacob and Esau.
Yeah.
So you can see stories. You got the same thing in Surah 21, ayah 51 to 71.
Yeah.
The story of Abraham.
Yeah.
After he destroys the idols, he's then thrown into a fiery pit. The Bible is very clear. Abraham was never in any fiery pit. But who was in a fiery pit?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Again, confusing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah.
There's a lot of confusions here.
Yeah.
And the reason they're all confused is because in what we have seen today, in every case, good man, in every case, these are borrowed stories. And when you borrow stories, you confuse things. We can see this in Surah 2, Surah 7, and Surah 20, the story of the Garden of Eden.
Yes, yeah.
There you can see a story where they have the Garden of Eden is very clear, close to the biblical account, but it's missing two of the most important things about the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
You know what they are?
Very important. Well, one is the fact that God is not there with them.
God's not in that garden.
Yeah.
But in our biblical account, God is in the garden.
He's definitely there.
He's in the garden.
Yeah.
And why is that important that God should be in the garden?
If you've got the concept of God wrong right from the very beginning, No wonder you don't understand the Bible. No wonder you don't understand Christian theology, or you don't understand that God can be with you. He's relational, that God can come to earth.
That's
and
right.
He's done it from the very beginning throughout the Jewish Bible, and we see the fullness of it in Jesus
Like this
Christ.
lady said, God cannot talk to me.
But
God
even,
cannot talk to
but
man
then
and woman.
even though she acknowledged that God spoke to Moses,
And the reason-
that God is even here in the
that's
park.
interesting.
Yeah.
So she did acknowledge Surah 20. She has to acknowledge that because God is talking to Moses in Surah 20.
Yeah.
But if you don't have any notion that God was talking to us face to face in the very beginning,
Yeah.
if you don't have that at the very beginning, everything else falls out of pack.
Yeah.
And this looks like the Quran has got that wrong. If only God was in that garden talking with Adam and Eve, like we have in Genesis chapter 3, verse 8 and 9.
If only they actually did what the Quran says and go to the people of the book to understand what the true scriptures said, then I don't think we'll see
Our
this mess.
Bible doesn't get it wrong.